This is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
Greetings, listeners. So it's taken a while for me to get this one up, but hopefully it will be worth the wait. This is the first panel, actually, that Rashawn and I did at WikiCon in Dallas this year, and we were joined by Mark Oshiro from Mark Does Stuff, and talked about what it was like for each of them to go through the reading of a super popular series under the public eye, and also what it was like coming to a series like this as an adult, from an adult perspective. So I think that you'll really enjoy this. It was super fun. And I also wanted to let all of you know that Rashawn and I are currently doing a Patreon fundraiser. Basically, it's a goal where if we reach a certain amount, we will give you all a reward. And the reward for reaching the goal that we have set is Rashawn and I will do A Song of Ice and Fire after we are finished with the Harry Potter reread. It will not be a patrons-only series. We are doing Patreon to get to our goal, but it will be released on iTunes for everybody on the same feed as the old Song of Ice and Fire show. And I really hope that we are able to reach that goal by the time we're done with the reread. We just started on Deathly Hallows this week. And I think it'll be really fun to do it with Rashawn and for me to have a series that is that I started off with. Oh my God, Siri started because I said the word Siri. It'll be really fun for me to sort of take back Song of Ice and Fire, which it was my first show. It was something I wasn't entirely ready for in some ways looking back. And I have changed a lot since then, and I think my perspective will be really different. And Rashawn won't be totally unspoiled. She's seen the entire Game of Thrones television show. She did read the first 2 books, but it was over a decade ago, so she doesn't really remember them. And I wouldn't normally feel comfortable doing something that wasn't actually unspoiled unless I had done it unspoiled once already. So it worked out really well. Rashawn's excited about it. So if you're interested in getting us there and making sure that we cover this, go to patreon.com/unspoiled. We are 72%, I think, of the way to goal. And you can see our progress on the left sidebar on that page, or if you're on mobile, if you scroll down past the descriptions of the Patreon tiers, you will also see our progress. So we just opened up last week, and I am really excited. We have until March to reach our goal, and I'm hopeful that that happens. All right, on with the show, and thank you all again for listening.
Good morning, LeakyCon.
Woo!
This is the second year in a row that this is here. I love all of you. I'm so excited that this is happening. Yeah. Thank you for being here. Lead the show.
All right. Well, everybody, let's introduce ourselves, I guess, go down the line. I am Natasha, the owner of Unspoiled Podcast Network.
I am Rashawn, a co-host on Unspoiled and co-host on the Harry Potter series.
My name is Mark Oshiro. I am the creator of Mark Reads and Mark Watches, which has a weird similarity of why we're all together. I'm also a young adult author. My first book, Anger is a Gift, came out last year. And I'm the forthcoming author of The Stars Around Us, out next summer.
Nice.
Excited.
And now we're going to talk about being unspoiled and being adults by not being adults. It's going to be great.
Yeah, so I'm really excited personally to be doing this panel with Mark, because Mark was the reason that I started Unspoiled. I found you, I don't even remember what I was searching for, but I wound up obsessively reading your...
Did you Google a hot mess? And then I showed up.
Yep, that was it. You are unprepared.
Yeah.
I found your watch through of Buffy.
Yeah.
And every single day when I got out of work, and I was working with Rashawn at the time, I would load it up before I got on SEPTA for my way home because I was going to lose service, and I would read and be like, what did he think of this episode? Oh my God. And I started to realize that I was looking forward to it so much each day. And at the time, I was married to somebody who was very into performing, and he had not read Song of Ice and Fire. And so that was our very first Unspoiled podcast. I had read it, he had not. And when you came to Philly at one point, I was like, Mark's coming to Philadelphia again!
And I definitely was there in the audience, like, hello.
Was that the basement one?
Yeah.
The basement of the coffee house? Oh, I remember that.
Yep.
Sorry, that sounds like a really dark adventure. Do you remember that lonely basement we met in? It was just me and you. Okay. So one of the reasons I was really excited to do this panel, too, is being a fandom person. I've been in fandom since I was a kid. I watched the X-Files in real time. I grew up watching The Twilight Zone. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. But I grew up in a very conservative religious household, and so I missed out on everything. So I came to most of my fandoms as an adult. And the reason I became part of the LeakyCon community back in 2011, the second LeakyCon ever. This is, by the way, my 11th LeakyCon. I love this con so much. Is that I started this blog in 2010, in the summer of 2010, or actually May of 2010, called Mark Reads Harry Potter. I had never read Harry Potter. And it was this thing that was so ubiquitous. Everyone I knew in my whole life had read Harry Potter, and it would get brought up, and they'd be like, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? Like, maybe you've just been pretending about being able to read. How have you not read Harry Potter? And it just became this thing of like, how have you not read this thing? And so I ended up writing this blog about me reading the books one chapter at a time, one day at a time, not knowing anything but one spoiler, and then thinking that spoiler... Wait, by the way, is there anyone not spoiled for Harry Potter? Because this is going to be real weird.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're going to talk about spoilers. I knew Dumbledore died, but I thought it was in the last book. Don't gasp. Go home and read a book.
How could you do this?
And so I have now, it is this month, actually tomorrow is the 10-year anniversary of Mark Reads. 10 years. I have been running this blog where I read things unspoiled and come into them as an adult. And I think there is a very different experience coming to things as an adult, especially I read a lot of young adult literature, and I write it too. Like, I think there's a very different experience. So I'm really excited to like dig into what is it like to come into things later instead of watching them as they happen.
My experience.
Get up in there, girl.
My experience is similar. I am. How old are you? Can I ask?
Huh? A number. I'm number years old. I'm 35.
Oh, my God. Okay, so I'm 44. So I am really beyond kind of when Harry Potter was a thing. And none of my peers read any of the books. It wasn't like I was an outlier in my social group or my work group. And I did not have a lot of respect for the series. I had zero respect for the series.
Don't you understate that.
And I couldn't imagine that it was anything I was interested in reading.
Was it one of those things where you're just like, it's so popular, I'm just never going to touch it? Or?
No, it was completely outside of anything I was interested in.
Yeah.
Anything I'd ever talked to anyone about. Yeah. I had no idea about it. I was vaguely aware of a phenomenon that was going on in the world.
Yeah.
But it might as well have been on Mars for how much impact it had on my day-to-day life.
That's interesting because the reason I was so resistant to it is I grew up in a science fiction, horror, speculative fiction household. We had no fantasy. So my thing was that growing up, I'm going to describe this person to you, and all of you will know exactly who they are. The kind of fantasy nerds at my junior high and my high school were the ones who, if you hadn't memorized the Silmarillion and knew every single word on every page of Lord of the Rings, they would not have a conversation with you. So I grew up with the kind of like stodgy, very condescending fantasy fan who was like, if you haven't read these things, we won't talk to you. And when you're new and you think you're interested in something and someone comes at you like that and does that kind of gatekeeping, I spent many years being like, oh, I guess I just don't like fantasy. So when Harry Potter was first suggested to me in like early 2010, my response was, I don't do wizards and shit. That's not my thing. Like I thought Harry Potter was like extreme high fantasy with super complicated everything. There was no relatable themes. Like nothing in this was going to be entertaining. Like I just would not. It was. I was like, that's over there. You do your wizard thing over here. I'm going to be over here watching Lost.
Mine was that it was for children. It was a kid's book. Why would I? When the first books came out, I was already going into my 20s when the books came out. So my entire experience of this fandom and the books and the movies was just that's kid stuff. Yeah. And I didn't even realize that it never occurred to me that the kid in the book would age as the books happened, right? So in my mind, the whole series from start to finish is about like an 11-year-old kid.
Yeah.
So I just never considered, that he would be maturing in the story. So when I did read the books finally, that was one of my favorite parts because it was the least expected thing for me.
Well, but I get why you would expect that because so much of like fiction, both like animated, live action, stuff that's in television and film and books, when you have a kid as the main character, they'll notoriously not age for like 700 years.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why I really love Steven Universe. One of the best shows ever. Okay, anyway.
It really is one of the best shows ever, though.
But I think that is a compelling thing that you don't often see in that space.
Right.
Particularly, like, it's also really rare, now I'm putting on my writer hat, like, to see a series start in middle grade and end in, like, high YA. Like, and watch it like almost change the group that it's meant for. That's really rare.
Like when I was covering it with Rashawn, going back to the beginning, I had to kind of mentally prep her and be like, "Look, I swear it gets better. It's not called the put outer by the end of the books." Like,
guys, that one line almost ruined the entire
the put outer.
thing.
She just kind of
wait. Which line?
The
Wait.
put outer when Dumbledore's going down the street and he's putting the lights out.
Oh yeah.
And she calls it a put outer. The audacity! I told her, I was like, I can't.
It turns into the Deluminator.
But I was
better.
But I was into that because it was like whimsical to me. The thing that like threw me is I was like, you're leaving a whole ass baby on this house step. Like, what if a wild dog comes out of nowhere and eats the baby? And I was like, is this a lot darker series than I expected? Like, what if the baby
I said so many times, all of these adults are making terrible decisions.
Well, I mean, that is also a mainstay of the whole series, I feel like. But
all of these trash.
Then I'm curious for both of you, what was the point in Harry Potter where you were like, oh yeah, this is it. Like this is
what's
my
so
thing.
great is that I have two perfect recordings that capture Rashawn. The first one was when I found out she hadn't read Harry Potter, which was live on our The Wire podcast that we did together.
Yeah, we were doing that.
And she was spoiled on that. She'd watched The Wire, and I hadn't. So she convinced me to do that.
I don't know how Harry Potter even came up.
I don't remember, but I mentioned something, and I was like, oh, my God, they're like Trelawney. And you were like, they're who now? And I was like, it was like that fisheye lens when Frodo's standing in the middle of the path, and I just was like, we're doing it. We're doing another podcast. And Rashawn's lack of enthusiasm in that moment is so palpable. She's just like, I guess. And then the moment when she was like, what is this? I read her on air live the reveal of Barty Crouch Jr.
Oh,
and you can hear her as he's starting to like reveal that he's not who she's going. What? Wait, what is this? What is this? And you can hear her panicking as I'm just trying not to laugh and continuing to read the story. And by the end, she's like, what is going on here? Anybody could be anybody. I don't know who's in this school. This changes everything. We got to put up a wall. We got to make sure that we're checking people's IDs when they come in. What is happening? And she just like went off for like half an hour just ranting of just like.
I was so shook.
So that was it.
Was so paranoid for I don't even know how long it took to recover. I don't think I ever truly recovered, but anytime anything happened, we would discuss it, and then I'd go, but it could be literally anybody, though, right? Sure, it says we're talking to Ron, but is it? How do we know? I was upended.
My moment was much earlier. I should also give some context that the history of Mark Reads did not start with Harry Potter. It started with Twilight. To make a very weird long story short, I started this blog, Mark Reads, because I was at Comic-Con the year when people started camping out to get into Hall H. It was like a huge thing, and now they do it every year. But that was the first year, and I ended up doing this whole interview piece that got picked up and got millions of page views about the people who camped out for days, 2 days before this panel, just to be in the same room as Kirsten Stewart and Robert Pattinson, which is weird because in 2010 we were all making fun of them, but now I would kill to be in the room with those two people. Like, I love Kirsten Stewart. I would start a war for her. Anyway, but so I had read all four Twilight books. Spoiler alert, I didn't like them. And so I came into Harry Potter very skeptical because I had just read this series where I invested so much time and ultimately didn't like it. So I tried to dislike Harry Potter, and I was like, why are you leaving babies anywhere? These Dursleys need to be ejected into the sun. I don't understand any of this.
My favorite joke, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The Dursleys are the worstleys. It's my favorite Natasha joke.
I can't believe that's the joke you decide to tell this whole room of people.
It's a pretty good one.
All the stuff I have up my sleeve, and that's what you lead. Oh,
the
I'm
Dursleys.
embarrassed. I'm sorry, everybody.
Truly the worstleys. Wow, I'm going to steal that. My route in, when I knew I was in, was really early, actually. It was when this big, hairy man wearing all leather descends upon this home and is like, you're a wizard. And I was like, this guy's like a leather daddy? Oh my God. And I'm like, which is weird because I meant it as a joke. And now there are still people 10 years later who think I have a huge crush on Hagrid. And I'm like, no, it was just, that's who he reminded me of. Like, I was living in West Hollywood at the time. Come on, give me a break. Like, but anyway, I was just like, this is amazing. This weird dude who has like all kinds of stuff in his pockets. Like, what? What is this? I love it. I'm in. And then it was just, and then the end of the first book, like, that's when I felt, I think that was the first point where I felt that J.K. like threw me off a cliff. Oh, God. Because I didn't guess it. I didn't pick it up. And that was the thing is I assumed these would be low stakes. Like once I started reading, I'm like, oh, it's whimsical, low stakes fantasy. And then you get to the end of the first book and you're like, oh, maybe not.
Yeah,
okay,
maybe there are some stakes.
And then the second one, you're like, this got kind of dark. But it's still fun. Everyone's fine. Like, someone got frozen. We're fine. Everything's fine. And then the third, you're like, Azkaban is messed up. What the? What is going on? And that was the thing for me that made that so compelling is and I really think she changed the world of what we could do in middle grade and young adult literature. We could write longer books and we could write dark stuff. Really dark, challenging stuff.
I love that because it takes place over a span of years. Yeah. So it allows the reader to mature along with the characters, And by the time you get to the end of those books, it's super dark, but I feel like you're really well prepared as the reader, right? Like she's laid a lot of the groundwork that's necessary for you to get into that darker stuff, but still feel like, not that it's all going to be okay, but you just trust her. You've built up this, especially because I had to read the books very slowly. Not as slow as in real time when you had to literally wait for the next book to come, but I didn't just get to burn right through them. I had to do, 1 or 2 chapters a week. Yeah. And, so it took, by the time we got to the end, I felt really connected to the story and really, invested in a way that I was fully unprepared for.
Same.
Like, guys, do you see what I'm wearing? This was not supposed to be what I am doing at this age, at what my life has been like. My husband... You guys, he's just like, I don't even know who you are anymore. I thought that, we were similar. I thought we shared the same sort of values.
No.
And now you're dressing up like a wizard. You're going to wizard conventions. And I'm like, you know what, baby? This is just where I live now. This is just, And he doesn't get it. He won't read the books. He still has the same attitude that I had about the books initially. I'm a much more open-minded and able to receive new information type of person than my husband is. He's a snob and just kind of a bit of a jerk. A little bit when it comes to stuff like this. But our opinions of the stories were very, very similar until I actually read them. And being an adult, when we started in 2015, is that right?
Yeah, I think 2015 or maybe very end of 2014.
So 40 years old, reading these children's books for the first time. And
did you say 4 years old? Oh, 40.
Lady,
my bad. No, continue. I'm sorry.
When I was an infant.
I was very well-read.
Well-read infant.
So, but like your point about leaving the baby on the doorstep, I feel sad for myself a little bit because I wish I had been able to read these stories when I was younger because that you can't replicate that. Like I can't read the books now and just imagine that I'm like 12 reading them for the first time, right? Your brain is different. You're not, I don't want to say you're not as open, but the magic I felt from these books was tremendous, and I feel like if I had read them when I was younger, it would have been doubly so. Like, there's like when you see little kids at the convention when we went to Wizarding World, my eyes were like saucers. But even the children, their eyes were like 2 times as big as mine because they were experiencing it on a level that you just can't really get as an adult, you know? So that bums me out a little bit. But,
I'm glad that you listened to me, your wise friend, and finally caved and did this, and that I'm such a bully that I managed to force you. I feel very proud of myself. I'm taking credit for this whole outfit. I'm just really living high up here. Just let guys go.
Yeah, I also think that resonates with me so much, this idea of like, particularly us who are adults who are reading, you know, literature that is aimed at children. And like I always like this as a YA author, like I always think of that as whatever I'm writing is in service of the youth. And it's so clear that she wrote the series with that in mind as well. And that adults like it, like that's just a bonus on top of it or whatnot.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was so compelling to me, even reading it as an adult, was that sort of same notion of like, what if I had had this when I was this age?
Yeah.
In particular, my favorite book is very contentious. I say this and people are like, wait, what? My favorite is Order of the Phoenix, which I think is the most difficult one to get through in a lot of ways. But it was the first book. I read it almost, God, how old was I when I was reading? I'm gay. I don't do math. Sorry. I don't know how time works, or I was 26 years old. And it was the first time I'd ever read a book in which the main character dealt with an authority figure abusing them. And I imprinted on that book because I got bullied by a school counselor when I was in junior high who picked on me for I mean, at the time I was completely 100% in the closet, you know, not telling anyone, but they knew. And they would repeatedly say things about like, if you just change your behavior, maybe kids won't beat you up. Like I would get in trouble for people beating me up. And so I had this experience that I'd never told anyone at all. And then I read Order of the Phoenix and I was like, oh my God, what if I'd had a book that told me this dynamic is wrong?
Right.
Is wrong. It is wrong for someone with this much power to treat a child this way. And I think how transformative that might have been to like have the courage to tell someone. Because I literally, until I wrote this blog entry about that first time Umbridge writes on Harry, I had never told anyone at all that this had ever happened. And so I had this like very, very intimate emotional reaction to Harry Potter, in part because I also recognize that all caps Harry, which a lot of people find grating and difficult to get through. And I get why, because PTSD and trauma is incredibly hard to get through. And it manifests in such very strange ways. But for me, that's my favorite book because I can see teenage me in Harry. So yeah, there is I do think there's a great value in reading it as an adult, but I often wonder what would have been different if I had had something like that as a child. Yeah.
We're doing the reread now because the first time through, Rashawn had never read them.
Right.
And then we made a deal with our listeners that if we reached a certain number of iTunes reviews, we would do a reread so that Rashawn could benefit from like knowing what happens this time and being able to like see the patterns and things instead. And I feel like Order of the Phoenix was the one that has prompted the most conversation and the most changed perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is that? What's different for you the second time around?
Well, the first time around, I felt so aligned with the kids in the story, with Harry and Hermione and Ron, and how nuts the whole world is going around them, right? And of course, you're disgusted by Umbridge. But on the reread, as we talk about the way in which bureaucracy can be evil, right?
Yeah.
Like it was like in that book. There's the big evil of Voldemort, right? Like the big bad of the whole story. But what's going on with the government and the way she's abusing power, and not just abusing it, the way she's like usurping and then abusing it, right? And how it's almost impossible to check her. Because she has the weight of the governing body, like 100% supporting her. And so you see all these little acts of resistance that are happening with the students and the DA, and also with the teachers being super shady to her, which I love. They won't help her clean up anything. It's just, and then it's so timely, right?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, when we...
Oh boy, that must be... real uncomfortable to reread it in 2018.
Yes, yeah, like
no.
Yeah, it's been great to dig into.
Wow. Yeah, the bureaucracy that she is using to abuse, being the same bureaucracy that they are supposed to use to check her, but of course can't because it's doing open heart surgery on itself.
Yeah.
It's really upsetting as an adult to suddenly be like, oh. That's yep, because everybody, it's just, there's the feeling of helplessness, and I can do X, Y, Z. I can call representatives. I can vote. Is that really it? Can I create little DA cells in my community where we practice defense against the dark arts? Because I would be down with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a definite perspective shift, both as an adult and in the context of what we're going through as a country right now, that is just a lot more. It changes everything about the conversation and makes everything feel like it hits a lot closer to home.
Agreed. Yeah.
I'm curious what the experience has been with you two also finding the Harry Potter fandom as an adult. Because, I didn't discover it till I was 26 years old. I vaguely was aware. It was the same thing. Like, I knew it was out there. I knew it was a huge thing. I knew that the night before a book came out, 90% of my friends disappeared and would not respond to any text messages. And if you're like, what are you doing? They were like, shut up, don't talk to me. You can't talk. And they would all stay up and immediately read the book at midnight. And I was just like, y'all are weird. I don't get this. Now I get it. But coming to it as an adult and seeing... There's a lot of years of work that this fandom has put in to build. I mean, the fact that
right?
We're this far away from the release of the first book, and this is still happening. So what has been the experience being an adult and getting to find this community?
The community is probably my favorite thing about these books.
Yeah.
The community has been built outside of just what we get in the original books, right? Like, when I think about the houses, right? And there's in the books, honestly, we're mostly talking about Gryffindor and Slytherin, right?
Right.
That they take up the bulk of the action in the books. But there's a whole community of Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws that we have just, I don't want to say we made stuff up, but we kind of just made a bunch of stuff up, to really flesh out.
Right.
And this is only my second convention. This is my second LeakyCon. I was not a fandom person, really.
Oh, interesting.
No. I was always a big reader, and I've read lots of fantasy and stuff and Star Wars. I mean, I like all that stuff, but I'm not a fandom person. I don't go and do stuff. I don't buy stuff like that.
I like how you're saying that in the present tense while also gesturing to the robe you're wearing in a giant fandom space.
The closest I could get would be with music, right?
Yeah.
There's for different types of music, depending on what you listen to, and then there are scenes that go with it, right?
Yeah.
So I am a punk rock hardcore person, right? And so there's I see those bars. We're gonna talk about those. We're gonna talk about that
later. Okay.
So that has a scene, and it's not. And I guess you could kind of call it a fandom, though they would not appreciate that term.
But you're right. That's what
right?
it is. Yeah.
So I have that experience, but this community of folks have just been. Honest to God, I met some of the best people from this podcast. From the podcast. Some dear friends, real. I don't know, guy. I'm going to tear up a little bit. But it's become very important, and it's so welcoming and just so open. And I don't know. I don't know if there's really anything else quite like it. I mean, Steven Universe probably comes super close.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything else quite like it. I'm so tickled to be a part of it.
Yeah.
What about you?
No. Oh, no, it's your turn. I asked a question.
I came to this, like, I was, probably 18, 19 when I started reading them, so I was older. This was not, like, a book for me as a kid. But having... Unspoiled now has, like, 35 different shows. And there are a lot of fandoms with different properties that I have covered. And I feel like Harry Potter is probably the most, oh, you haven't read them? You've got to read them.
Yeah.
Not, oh, my God, you haven't read them? Yeah. Well, okay.
And that's so true.
You know, it's just, there's a lot more like, I want you to be part of this, not like, you can't sit with us.
That's like what you were talking about earlier about the like, sort of high fantasy and gatekeeping that can happen. I don't think there's any of that in this community.
I don't feel it. You know, I'm sure it's out there, but like, I don't see it constantly the way that I do with some fandoms, where it really feels like you need to have, like you said, an encyclopedic knowledge of even not just whatever property is out there, but you need to be reading and all the ancillary materials and everything. And with Harry Potter, it feels so much more like a some place that we all go for comfort, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just really, I feel like this is what the fandom that I really gravitate towards because
it feels very much like home to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
it does. It just feels like a place to, like, I like that idea that it's almost like a destination. I really like that. It feels like going to a place that you know is going to be there, and you know what to expect when you get there, and you know it's a place you go when you need to get out of the madness that is how we live now.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's I have to echo. I mean, I feel like I'm just going to echo both of you, but you know, I discovered it as an adult. I knew Harry Potter fandom was out there. I knew like a bunch of fanfic. And like fanfic tropes. Like,
I haven't read any yet.
Oh, honey. Oh, new panel. I'm just going to yell at you about Harry Potter fanfiction because it is wild. There's so much of it, and no, we'll talk about that later. Okay, anyway. But I think what was interesting to me, and so to give you some context, is that, you know, I wrote this blog about Twilight, and then I moved on to Harry Potter. And even then it was, like, marginally popular. And in the middle of me reading Goblet of Fire, the whole internet found it. And there was a single day where every Harry Potter fan site linked to this website.
Oh, my God.
All of them on one day. I think we had something like 1.8 million people in one 24-hour period. So I went from
if anybody
nothing.
wants to do something like that for Unspoiled, I'm just saying.
It was this thing where it was someone on the Leaky Cauldron, and then someone on I don't know, and then there were a bunch of like smaller but it just like passed through like, yo, there's this guy who's a hot mess who has never read Harry Potter, and I can't like that's just how, and it just was this thing where it passed word of mouth very quickly in a short period of time, and it was this. What I loved about it so much in the experience and then afterwards was that while I was reading it was how invested people were in not spoiling me. Like, this is where all of these rules I have like ridiculous rules about how people can comment and talk to me on my blog so that people don't ruin the experience. But like, people were like, came up with like, you know, like they were the people. There's this thing you can use to comment called ROT13, in which it shifts all the letters of the alphabet 13 letters later, and then you can just put this garbage. It just looks like garbage in the comments, but that's how people who needed to talk about spoilery things could talk to one another, and I wouldn't be able to read it. And so people started doing that. And then there were the people who were like, here is the historical, like there were entire people who every day would show up and be like, here's the historical basis for some of the stuff that appeared in the book and what we think she was basing this on. And like, so I was getting like history lessons, wall of text that I couldn't read, 8 million GIFs. Like, it was just this party every day where, and it would be like 800 or 900 comments a day, which like is did so much, and every day this community showed up for me. And then the next summer, 2011, I get an email that's like, hey, this is the second year of this convention called LeakyCon. Do you want to come down to Orlando and present on Harry Potter and do a panel about Mark Reed's Harry Potter? And I was like, no one had ever asked me to do a thing for them for anything ever. And I was like, is this a joke? Or am I going to show up and you're going to be like, just kidding. Like, but I showed up to a completely packed, like hundreds of people.
Oh my God.
Like people had the autographing stuff. It was very, but that was the thing is repeatedly over and over again, this community has shown up for me in ways that most other fandoms haven't. But and I think it's this thing that so many of us find it as a home. Like we find this as like this comfortable place where we can talk about things both positive and negative, because it's even been really cool in the last few years as we're getting all this supplementary material, how many me and my Harry Potter friends are like, we can kind of trash talk this and know that we don't hate Harry Potter. Like there's not this thing of like if you criticize something, because that happens in a lot of other fandoms, or if you criticize something, they're like, well, you've never liked this ever, I hope you die. Like, and like not saying that doesn't happen, but what's been really cool coming to it as an adult is a lot of me and my friends, we can have the discourse and it doesn't ruin our day. We can have let's critically engage with this and talk about what this means in a way that's kind of fun, but also like it doesn't ruin our love of what these books mean to us.
I think that's 100% true, because we are not shy about the things that we think are troubling in the stories. And a couple of blind spots. And then in recent years, our JK can be away on the Twitters, but that doesn't take away my love for the books. And I feel like we've been having some really important conversations. I know we have in our group. And no one is like, well, I'm never listening to you again because you criticized this one thing in Harry Potter. Like, how dare you?
Which I have most definitely gotten on a lot of my other shows.
Me too.
Song of Ice and Fire and Dresden Files are... And hashtag not all men, but it's a lot of times male-dominated fandoms that tend to get the most offensive about things.
How about that? That's super weird, right?
Weird.
I mean,
wonder why that happens.
I wish we had a word to describe that behavior and system that's in place.
I think one of the other things, too, is that almost more so than pretty much any other fandom I've been in is the community just took this and made it their own.
Absolutely.
And I like that you talk about, like, we just made up stuff, but, like, there's so much value in the stuff that we made up. I just spent, like, half an hour before this walking around the marketplace and I only made it through a third of it in an hour. And I was like, what the heck? What? There's all of this stuff. And it's amazing and well made and well thought out. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what she says on Twitter. People will do that, and they will create those things because they love them. And there's this amazing thing where this community makes this. Like LeakyCon, there's been so many of these, and I've had so many incredible... I mean, how many of you have been to some of the other LeakyCons before? Boy, there was one where... I'm trying to remember where it was. I want to say it was in Chicago, where... I held court in the lobby of the hotel and just read incredibly inappropriate Harry Potter fanfic. And it's one of the best memories I've ever had. Because, I don't know if you know this, one of the best things in the world to do is read Harry Potter crackfic to people who don't know it exists. It's great.
I've been trying to say.
Yeah, you should really read the one where it's the Hogwarts itself and the giant squid. Yeah. Yes, you should do it. Do it. It's great. It's very tender. It'll also ruin your life. But I have those memories, and it's so incredible because I don't know that I have those memories, similar things with other fandoms. And there's this thing where we just get together and we do our own thing, and it's so fun and amazing.
Yeah, the number of discussions, the fact that there are so many panels happening every day and everybody's having a different conversation and it's all about this. Later, and regarding being able to criticize stuff, Rashawn and I have another panel with the ladies from Wizard Team, and we're going to be talking about what Ilvermorny should have been like if we were actually taking the history of our country into account and not try to pretend none of that happened and just have it be like a colonialized copy of Hogwarts. And we can have that conversation here amongst fans who are all like, yeah, let's talk about that. What's that like? And nobody's like, I can't believe they're trying to do you think you're a better writer than her? She knows what she's doing, which 100% is the reaction I have gotten to other properties that I've criticized, is people literally saying, well, let's see you write something then. And which I'm like, that's not what I'm here for.
For context, because you found me when I was watching Buffy. There is an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where things happen. It's very contentious in fandom. And someone in the comments of my review of this episode, it's called Seeing Red, was like, well, if you don't like this, write a better one. So I just wrote a whole novel in response. So it does work. You can do that. Also, what a nerd I am. Like, oh, someone got mad at me on the internet? Well, I'm writing a book. Like, such a nerd.
Ooh, homework.
I deserve to be bullied. Anyway, no, it's terrible. But you're right. Like, I love that we get both of that, because I think there's something that ultimately makes us better people. It makes the world better when we can talk about these things. And I think what it is, and I come across this a lot in fandoms, particularly more from adults than kids, I will admit, which is that, especially if they've been in it a long time, is that it's almost like their identity is so assumed by this thing that they're into that if you criticize it, they think you're inherently criticizing the person.
Yeah.
Which is like, no, it's not about you at all. It's about this property. And like when you talk about things like stereotypes and tropes, or I like to say that, I'm going to steal this from my friend Kat Valenti, who's a fantastic novelist, but she talks often about every story is, you think of it as a portrait, and there's a frame. And sometimes whoever the author is and the thing that they create, there are things that are not in the frame that they leave out of the picture. Sometimes they're intentional, because you can't have every single thing in every book. But that means every author will unknowingly leave things outside of the frame. And what are those things? And should we talk about that? And, and like, as someone who's, brown, who's Latinx, like, I'm not in those books. Like, I'm not in those books at all. There's no direct representation of me at all in Harry Potter. And that is a conversation I like to have with people and to talk about what that means. But also at the end of the day, I'm just like, I'm Luna Lovegood. It's great. I can find that thing where I deeply relate with that. I deeply relate with all caps Harry. Like, that's my Patronus, is just him yelling. Could you imagine? Like, I cast my Patronus and it's just Harry yelling at you.
Throwing a tantrum.
Why isn't anyone listening to me? Like,
I would love it.
Thanks for my jokes about my trauma. Thanks for laughing. It's great.
He knocks over everything in your room. Every time you cast him, it's a huge mess because he's just raging, having the tantrum that he had at the end of Order of the Phoenix, where he destroys all of Dumbledore's stuff.
I also love how that is, you've also described a cat. So maybe it's like Harry Potter as a furry? Like a cat furry?
Oh, no. Okay, you know what?
They asked me to be on panels. You can't make sounds like that. It's not allowed. This is a no judgment zone. Anyway, we have about 20 minutes. I would like people from the audience to join this conversation as well. Are there things you want to ask of us coming into Harry Potter as adults and the things that we have created, or bring up discussions? So we're going to go here on the aisle and then over here on the aisle second.
You guys talk about being involved.
Yeah.
And you say 20, and I'm like, oh, no.
No.
So how many of you were like in your 40s, 30s, 40s when you started?
Yes.
And listening to you.
Yeah.
Younger adults, and I can totally relate with you because it's even different from your 20s to your 40s.
Yep.
How you react to these books and take them out.
Yeah.
So, totally different, but all the same and thrilled we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I grew up reading the Harry Potter books and was always like really enveloped in all fantasy worlds as I was growing up. Really, really dislike anything that has to do with like detective stuff or like crime stuff like that. My older brother is the complete opposite of me. So he just proposed a deal to me yesterday where if I watch The Wire, then he will read the Harry Potter books.
Oh.
You will win. Do it. Do it.
The Wire's super good.
The Wire is one of the most perfect television shows ever written.
Yep.
The second season is slow. Stick with it.
Stick with it.
It's worth it. It
one
is.
of my favorites.
Listen to
incredible.
Unspoiled The Wire.
You should. You are not. Oh, I can't even.
Don't.
Oh.
One book for every season, and then I'm hoping once we get to 5, once he gets to the 5th book, he'll just read the other 2.
Oh yeah, I mean.
But it just seems to envelop everything that I dislike on TV. So
It's a nightmare. I want to tell you. I will just say the reason The Wire is so beloved is it does everything opposite of what you expect from a procedural television show.
Yep.
It is highly serialized instead of case of the week. Oh, dead bodies everywhere. Why did I do that voice? I don't know. That's my procedural voice. It is.
when I'm talking about how I don't want to watch The Wire.
Yeah. I will. It is going to surprise you and break your heart. It is just exquisite for reasons I can't tell you. You're also going to recognize a lot of very famous people who got their start on The Wire, and you're going to be like, "What?
Yeah,
you were on The Wire." I can't.
Yeah, that was like pretty much almost the deal that Rashawn and I made, because once I figured out that she hadn't done Harry Potter, I was like, well, if you want to keep doing this podcast that we're doing right now, guess what, sister? Because I am figuring out how to make you. But yeah, The Wire is, I have only seen the entire series the one time because of the show. And I have been needing to rewatch it because my fiance was watching along with me up until season 2, the end of it. And then he fell behind. And I couldn't go back and rewatch it right away because it's a lot. Yeah. But it is really, it's the kind of show that feels, again, so relevant to right now specifically. It's just a kind of a timeless, and it feels super modern, oddly, and is nothing like other procedural stuff I've ever watched at all. It's just, yeah, the writing is spectacular.
Yep. One of the best TV shows ever made. That just is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's funny to hear y'all talk about how, like, on the reread, you realize, like, how just kind of timely stuff is. Because after that, I hadn't read this series at all. I, too, had a mom who was like, you're not allowed to read it. And then by the time she got past that, I was like, y'all are like 5 books deep. I don't really
Yeah.
care anymore. After the election in 2016, a lot of my friends were going back to the Harry Potter books.
Oh, interesting.
And like I had a few that were listening to Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, and like that was their self-care, and I was like, I need something.
Yeah.
I'm struggling. And so I got them, and I read through once, and then I read through 4 more times. And I was like, what is this? Why have I not like had this? And it's been a really cool experience of connecting with friends who were big in the fandom. Like, we obviously were friends with other stuff, but like now there's like this new thing.
Yeah.
And it turns out my partner was like secretly hiding the level of his father. I didn't like them, but I read them and he's like, oh, so we can go.
He pulls back a carpet and there's a trap door to a hole, and he's like,
Anyway, so I'm curious if there's like anyone in like your life that you've been able to like connect with, like since reading them, and like.
Oh man. Okay. I have a kind of similar story. My last ex, we went on a date like 2 months after we started. This was like we'd been dating each other for 2 months, and I don't remember. We were in Kansas City, Missouri, because we were going to we were going to some convention there, some fandom thing or whatever. And he didn't really seem like much of a nerd or like a geek or anything like that. And we're sitting there and we're talking, and he's like, what's this convention going to be like? And I'm like, I've never been. I don't really know, whatever like that. And he's just like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, do you know any of this sort of stuff? Like, are you into this sort of thing? And he was like, like I watch these TV shows. I've seen these movies. And I'm like, we had like pretty similar tastes. And he was like, and I always grew up as a big fan of Harry Potter. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And he was like, yeah, there was, there's just a part of that I don't really talk about that much. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he was like, I'm kind of embarrassed. And I'm like, about liking Harry Potter? And he knew about Marguerite's Harry Potter. Like, we had talked about it because, like once you get to know me, you have to understand that I make videos for people on the internet and I cry in them. And it's not adult content. Like, because I get that question a lot. Like, that sounds like pornography. And I'm like, no, it's not. I promise. It's normal. And so we're talking, and he was just like, oh, well, I used to read a lot of fan fiction. I'm like, why are you embarrassed? I was like, I've written it before. And he was like, oh, well, I guess I can tell you. like, my favorite thing when I was growing up, I was not prepared for the answer. He was like, I was really into Harry Fenrir fan fiction. I was like, whoa. Wait, what? And he was like, oh, why are you reacting this way? And I'm like, that was your pairing? And he was like, yeah, it was kind of my favorite thing. And I was like, how old were you? And he was like, 14. And I was like, oh my God. But he then was like, yeah, I used to read all of this. Like, I used to go to adultfanfiction.net when I was 14 years old. And I was like, wait, you were like deep in Harry Potter. He's like, yeah, I've read like every novel-length fanfic on fanfiction.net. And he was like, I was in both of the, there was like, I can't think of the names of them. There was like, the names of there's like the Harry, Ginny site. There was like, not Gryffindor, something Tower. Was it Gryffindor Tower? He knew all of them. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, you have just revealed a whole part of you that I didn't know was there. And he was just like, you're not like unattracted by any of this? And I was like, oh no, this is great. I'm also now going to make fun of you forever because Harry Fenrir? What? Yeah. Like, I kind of get it, but also like, anyway, we don't need to go down that path. But yeah, it was an amazing moment where I was like, we'll be fine. Like, we don't need to have, because there's that thing sometimes where you make a new friend and you're like, oh, do I tell them?
How much of my weird?
Right. Yeah. How much do you want to show?
Yeah, how much, so.
There's a couple of people in my life that I found out like the books. There's one, an old friend who I've known for a really long time, and the books never once came up. Not once. And then when I started doing a podcast, he was like, oh, those books are so good, and wanted to talk about it. I was like, I've known you for 25 years. What? Like, he just never talked about it. I don't know if it was a conscious shame. It probably was, because there was a lot of ridicule.
Yeah. From you.
It's funny because it's
I like
true.
this passive. There was. Mm-hmm.
But,
I remember.
But no, I didn't really have any other like large groups of people that outed themselves.
I didn't really like. It was such a weird thing because when I was first reading them, I was in this time of my life where I was just like very focused on like work and getting my life together, and I didn't talk to anybody about them really as I was reading them.
Yeah.
And the closest that I got to like any sort of it was meeting up with my friends like on the release nights and dressing up and and I don't even think that I really did that. And it wasn't until I got older and got on the internets that was when I started to be like, oh, sweet, there are so many like easy ways to connect with people with this stuff, because there were often like in person, but I always was sort of like, well, how does that go? Do we just get together and go, how about this part? That was a good part. Like, I didn't really know how you would do it, And it's kind of ironic that I was so nervous about having that kind of conversation, and I'm literally like here doing this with a microphone.
Well, I find that's actually common too, because when I first started going to LeakyCon, and I would tell my friends like, oh, I'm going to this Harry Potter convention, and they're like, what do you do there? And I was like, it's like a convention, like a festival. It's all in support of the books and stuff. And they're like, so there's just like a panel for each book? And I was like, well, no, there's like dressing up, and like there's like games, and there's like comment and all this stuff like that. And they're like, so you just sit around and talk about is it like a book club? And I'm like, okay, I'm never going to describe this to you. Like, no, there's so much more. But
cannot wrap his head around what goes on here. It just doesn't make any sense to him. It's very much like what you just said. He knows that I'm doing a panel, but I don't think he has really any idea what that means. He also doesn't understand why people would want to listen to us talk about the book that we're reading.
I'm frankly still surprised people care
that's
what we
true.
say.
But I mean, it never really gets old. It's still this thing where some days I sit back and I think, and I'm like, I've been doing this for 10 years. How is anyone still following along? But I think with your podcast, it's because I think so many of us really just want to feel connected to another person. And I think there's this amazing thing that happens with fiction where we find ways, because all of us come to stories with our own stories and our own experiences. And I think there is always going to be that transformative element, because storytelling is what makes us human. It's what's a huge part of who we are and how we came to be. And I think any of us who are in fandoms and who are doing this sort of like literary criticism and like, any of this work we're just strengthening that bond. And I think that's what you do with your podcast, is that people have found something interesting in this work and they just want someone to talk about it. And that's what you do.
Yeah. It still boggles the mind that this is even a thing.
Yeah, when somebody asks me what I do for a living, I always have to take a deep breath and be like, here we go. I got to try and explain this because, I went to the doctor and she was asking me, and I explained, and I was like, and people will commission me to, read a couple chapters of a book or watch an episode of a show, and I'll go on camera and talk about it live for an hour. And you could see her trying to phrase the question so that it didn't just come out as, who the fuck are you? Why do they care what you say? She was trying so hard to be polite about it, but just be like, what? And I'm like, I don't know. That's a very valid question. What about me? Why do they care? I'm here. I'm doing it, and they're coming and listening, and I don't know why, but I'm riding this as long as I can.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how it goes.
We have time for 2 more questions. Someone else, you had your hand up, and then we'll do purple hair, and then over there if we have time.
That's a good question. You want to start?
Don't be a dick. AKA Voldemort. Could you imagine if someone just walked up to him in the books and was like, why are you such a dick? Like, oh my God. Come on, bruh.
It's
like,
funny you mention that.
Yeah, I think, because we talked about this earlier. Sorry, they just handed me a ribbon that says, Snape was still a dick, thow. And it's got his
We've got ribbons
on it.
if you awesome.
God bless this ribbon. I think, we've already touched on how weird this book has been to read in the last few years and to engage with the themes that are in it, which is, I don't think it's you'll often hear this, especially when people are writing speculative fiction, oh, you predicted the future. And it's that if you pay attention to history, we tend to do the same things over and over again. I think some of the most important lessons revolve around difference and bullying. And while I don't always think the teachers deal with bullying very well at all, actually, sometimes I go back and I'm just like, you literally knew, and we're watching these kids bully one another and you didn't do anything about it. And I'm like, I just want to impair you. Anyway, no, that's not going to happen. But I think there are always going to be strong lessons about that, about speaking truth to power, particularly that one. I think that is a thread that is in all 7 books. Oh boy, as an adult, what do you think?
I think the part that really sticks with me in these books is how hard Harry has to work to get the world to listen to him, that Voldemort is back. And when you think about the things that are in the world, the systems of power that we are reluctant to name, especially when you start talking about things like racism and nationalism. And people put a lot of work into telling you the thing you're looking at is not the thing you're looking at, right? So I love that in these books, it's sort of an acknowledgement that sticking your head in the sand or denying the very real problem it is in the world is no way to solve it. You have to say what it is, right? And that's true, in big picture, and it's also very true for me personally, just in my life. You cannot pretend that Voldemort is not back when he is clearly, everywhere. It's that kind of and having the courage to be the one who says it when you're not allowed to say it. You know, like we are living in the books where they don't even say his name anymore. And Harry is one of the few people who says his name at the beginning of those books, right? He's like you said, like a truth teller.
Yeah.
And a little bit of a, what do you call it? Like when, not the canary in the coal mine, but he's seeing what's coming. Like he sees what's coming, and he's trying to rally and warn. And it's such a fight because people often will choose to not see the thing because the thing is so terrible, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's what I think about a lot in those books.
Yeah, similarly, just you know what the right thing is. And that's like Harry's strength, is that it's rare for him to go, oh, should I? Or he's like, no, I don't care who is telling me I'm going to get punished. I don't care who is in power right now, going to the press and saying X, Y, Z. I am going to continue doing regardless of what laws say or how I'm being slandered, I am going to continue on this path because that I can't live with myself if I don't. And that for me is the number one thing, because that's a really hard thing, but you have to for him, it's a literal life and death situation in a much more material sense because he's specifically a target. Yeah. But if you think of it as, well, all of us are, it's a lot more, there's more texture there, it's just, oh, okay, I have stake in this specifically also, and treating everything like that. And that my friends also do. And just, he's out here being really brave, organizing in school under people's noses, and just, the way that he continues to influence even after he leaves the school, and they're continuing with DA stuff. And I just think that getting balls rolling and continuing to show people, I will be here saying the thing. If you want to say the thing, you're not going to be all by yourself. I will also be here. I think is really, for me, what I like about Harry as a character so much. Cool. So we said a couple more questions. But there's room for one more, maybe.
If your question has a 0-second answer, because I did at the end. Go real quick. Go fast. This says 1 minute.
I was just wondering if you've had any experience where you talked about Harry Potter outside of your inner circle. I was the one that would come home and literally scream to my mom about how awesome this book is. And I got her interested in reading it. And I was just wondering if you guys ever had that kind of experience.
My family, they have been really sweet about it. No one is interested in actually reading the books.
I love the way you said that.
But they're been,
you're into this thing. It's cute.
They've been very, very sweet. And my mother-in-law said to me, and my husband said the same thing. They have remarked on how happy it makes me. So that makes them happy. I haven't really tried to get anybody to read the books, but also I don't know how many people are left that haven't read the books. But yeah, my family has been really nice about, I don't want to say indulging me, but not making me feel, like a giant weirdo. So that's been good. Yeah.
Cool friends.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for showing up.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed this. We all have panels, signings,
ribbons if you guys want some.
And
come get ribbons.
Thank you.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.